There is a particular kind of hunger that comes from knowing your family nearly did not survive. John Simmons built his entire existence around that hunger, and for decades, it looked like genius. But by 2025, that same instinct that once created an empire had begun to unravel it. The story does not start with makeup or stadiums. It starts with a name. Chaim Wittes, born August 25, 1949 in Haifa. But more importantly, it starts with ghosts. His mother, Flora Klein, carried them with her everywhere. She was a teenager during the Holocaust, locked inside Auschwitz while most of her family vanished. She survived through luck and will, but survival came at a cost. The memories did not fade. They lived in the house. They shaped every conversation, every decision, every moment of apparent normalcy. His father, Franz Wittes, carried his own scars from the same dark chapter. Together, they built a life in a small Israeli town called Tirat Carmel, working class, modest, quiet. But quiet was a luxury they could never fully trust. The marriage unraveled. His mother made a decision that would reshape everything. She would take her son and start over somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere safer. In 1958, Flora liquidated what little she had, bought 2 one-way tickets to America, and walked onto a plane with a child who barely understood what was happening. They landed at Idlewild Airport, later renamed JFK, and stepped into New York through the lens of survival rather than opportunity. There was no celebration. There was Queens, cramped apartments, tight money, neighborhoods where every expense was calculated twice. Jackson Heights first, then other corners of outer boroughs that looked nothing like the American dream from far away. The shock arrived immediately. The boy who understood Hungarian and Hebrew found himself surrounded by English he could not speak. On his first day of school, he answered questions in his native languages while classmates laughed. That moment, humiliation meeting determination became a fork in the road. He could have withdrawn. Instead, something locked into place. He decided he would master this place. Not through formal lessons, but through absorption. He consumed American culture like a system to be decoded. Comic books became his textbook. Television reruns became his teacher. He mimicked radio DJs, practicing their accents in empty rooms until the foreignness wore off his tongue. Every day was fieldwork. Every conversation was data. What was happening was not just language acquisition. It was the construction of an entirely new identity. He was learning how heroes sounded, how confidence was performed, how attention was captured and held. As he moved into his teenage years during the mid-1960s, this drive intensified rather than faded. He worked whatever jobs he could find while staying in school, daily assistant, eventually even a 6th grade teacher in Harlem, a detail that surprises people until they understand the pattern. He was not looking for a career. He was looking for a path that would lead somewhere bigger. He attended Sullivan County Community College and Richmond College, but music was already pulling him in a different direction. By the mid-1960s, he was playing in local New York bands Lynx, Missing Links, Long Island Sounds, Bullfrog, beer names nobody remembers because these were semi-professional outfits scrounging for bar gigs and tiny paychecks around Queens and Manhattan, but something important was happening on those small stages. While other young musicians drifted through rehearsals and stumbled through shows, Chaim was watching. He was learning which songs made a room respond, which hooks made a bar owner willing to book them again. He began to understand that a 3-minute song was not just art, it was a transaction. The audience was telling him something every single night, and he was paying attention. The reinvention of his name came in stages, each one strategic. First, he became Jean Klein, a simpler, easier name for English speakers to pronounce, a practical erasure of his original identity to fit his adopted country. Then, by the late 1960s, he moved to John Simmons, reportedly taking the surname from rockabilly performer Jumping John Simmons. It was calculated. It was clean. It was American. And it looked good on a marquee. He understood something crucial that many musicians never grasped. Your name shapes your first impression. Your image becomes your brand. He was already thinking like a businessman before he had anything to sell. In 1970, fate introduced him to Paul Stanley. Stanley Harvey Eisen was also ambitious, also restless, also hungry for something bigger than local clubs and half-formed dreams. They recognized themselves in each other immediately. They formed a group called Rainbow, which quickly became Wicked Lester. The lineup was solid. Gene on bass, Stanley on guitar, plus Steve Coronel on lead guitar, Brooke Ostrander on keyboards, and Tony Zarella on drums. By 1971, they had done what seemed impossible. They would secured a record deal with Epic Records and booked time at Electric Lady Studios, the legendary facility linked to Jimi Hendrix. It should have felt like the beginning. Instead, it became a failure that taught them the most valuable lesson of their careers. The label shelved the album. They did not see commercial potential. The band's fusion of folk, pop, and rock seemed unfocused, muddled, lost in its own indecision. For most musicians, that rejection would have been crushing. For Simmons and Stanley, it was a blueprint for what not to do. They realized that talent alone was worthless without identity. They needed a sonic spine. They needed a visual language that could not be ignored. Most of all, they needed to be unforgettable the moment someone saw them. So they dissolved Wicked Lester in 1972 and by January 1973 re-emerged as something entirely different. Kiss. The transformation was not cosmetic, it was architectural. Everything was designed with intention now, and John Simmons was at the center of that redesign. The first Kiss show took place on January 30, 1973, at the Popcorn Club in Queens. It was a basement room. Fewer than 10 paying customers showed up. The bar had bored regulars nursing drinks. There was nothing about that night that suggested destiny. And yet something profound occurred. 4 unknown musicians walked into a room that barely noticed them and behaved as if they owned the world. John was already constructing the persona that would define him. The makeup was crude, the technique rough, but the idea was crystalline. He wore a menacing demon face sketched in sharp black lines, with eye shapes that suggested something inhuman, something dangerous. He added towering platform boots, bat-like armor, and a tongue that thrust out with theatrical exaggeration. Even in that empty room, he attempted fire-breathing using lighter fluid. The club owner nearly ejected them, but that moment revealed his operating principle. He was not interested in fitting in. He wanted to create spectacle. He wanted to suggest danger. He wanted people to feel that something wild had entered their space. The makeup decision became foundational. Simmons and Stanley understood something their competitors did not. Rock music was becoming visual. Radio was one medium, but the real power was in the image. They needed to look like living comic book figures, part monster, part myth, part amplified versions of themselves. They needed to be impossible to forget. On March 19, 1975, Kiss released Dressed to Kill through Casablanca Records. The label was desperate for a hit. The pressure was real. The album ran just under 30 minutes, but embedded within it was the song that would transform everything. Rock and Roll All Night. Paul Stanley had written the core riff. Gene had helped shape the chorus into pure party mechanism, direct, loud, chantable, built for thousands of voices to synchronize around. The studio version did not explode immediately, but when it appeared live on the album Alive, something shifted. The song reached the top 20, and from that moment forward, it became a ritual. Night after night, Gene, now fully embodied as the blood-spitting demon, would lead thousands of people into that chorus until it stopped being a song and became a shared religious experience. That one moment changed everything. The momentum kept building. On March 15, 1976, producer Bob Ezrin helped them create Destroyer, their 4th album. This time they had momentum behind them. This time they had money. The album debuted at number 81 on the Billboard 200 and climbed to number 11 within weeks. It stayed on the chart for 84 weeks. It became their first platinum album in America. Songs like Detroit Rock City and Beth proved they could stretch beyond formula without losing their core identity. On stage, Gene kept pushing the demon further. He rose on hydraulic platforms. He breathed fire as songs opened. He made himself look enormous, untouchable, impossible to ignore. Kiss was not a rock band anymore. It was a complete spectacle, and John understood, perhaps better than anyone, how to monetize spectacle. From the mid-1970s onward, he treated Kiss like a franchise rather than a band. Other musicians thought about songs, tours, and albums. Jean thought about ownership. He thought about what could be licensed, what could be sold, what could live in people's homes and pockets long after the concert ended. Face paint, logos, guitar picks, boots, posters, comic books, lunchboxes, pinball machines. Thousands upon thousands of products, each one branded, each one controlled, each one another revenue stream. By the early 2000s, Estimates place their merchandise sales at over $1 billion. That is not an exaggeration. That is the scale they would reach. Few rock bands have ever understood the business dimension like Jean did. He saw that the demon face had value. He protected it fiercely. Trademarks mattered. Visual identity mattered. Because he would learn something early on. An image can be worth as much as a song if you build it carefully and defend it ruthlessly. On June 18, 1983, something shocking happened. The band that had hidden behind makeup since 1973 walked onto MTV and revealed their faces to the world. It was a calculated gamble. For a decade, the makeup had been their defining characteristic. Removing it was removing their most powerful visual asset. But the world was changing. MTV was the new frontier. Glam metal was rising. Album sales had declined. Sometimes survival means adapting, even when adaptation means stripping away what made you legendary. The move worked. Their comeback album Lick It Up became gold in 1983. The band continued, though the roster shifted. Vinnie Vincent, Mark St. John, Bruce Kulick came and went. Paul Stanley handled more of the musical day-to-day operations, while Jean kept his face in the larger culture through film roles and media appearances. But the past never truly fades in rock and roll. On April 16, 1996, John Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss stood on the deck of the USS Intrepid in New York, fully painted in their original 1970s makeup, and announced a reunion tour. The announcement reached worldwide audiences instantly. The response was staggering. Nearly 40,000 tickets for the first show sold in just 47 minutes. When the Alive worldwide tour opened at Detroit, his Tiger Stadium on June 28, 1996, nearly 40,000 fans filled the stadium. Over 92 shows, the tour grossed tens of millions of dollars. Kiss became the highest-grossing touring act of that year. The message was unmistakable. The demon still had power. The image still had magic. Nostalgia, it turned out, was a business model that never expired. On June 13, 2001, the Hollywood Walk of Fame honored Kiss with a star. For Jean, the moment carried profound weight. The boy who arrived in New York unable to speak English, uncertain where he belonged, had helped create a character that was now officially embedded in American pop culture history. The band had sold 35 million albums in the United States alone, over 100 million worldwide. Few American rock acts had built legacies of that magnitude. On April 10, 2014, the original lineup was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at Brooklyn's Barclays Center. The honor was overdue, and the night carried its own complexity. Only the original four received recognition. Later members were excluded. Tensions between members meant the band did not perform. But the induction confirmed what had been obvious for years. Kiss had endured. John Simmons had endured. The immigrant kid from Queens had turned reinvention into a permanent condition. John Simmons spent decades turning controversy into content. By now, it is so deeply woven into his public identity that audiences expect eruptions every time he speaks. For more than a decade, he waged a public battle against the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame over their inclusion of hip-hop artists. He argued that rap belonged elsewhere, that it did not speak his language, that the institution had lost its way. When NWA was inducted in 2016 and Ice Cube defended hip-hop's rightful place in rock history, Simmons did not soften. He pushed harder. He kept insisting that rock should remain a guitar-based club, that the institution was diluting its mission. Even into the 2020s, he was still fighting this battle against cultural change. Over time, he became a symbol of old guard resistance, the aging rock warrior still clinging to a world that had already moved on. But Simmons rarely treats backlash as a warning. He treats it as accelerant. Once he locks onto a position, he repeats it until the criticism itself becomes the story. Then came early 2025 and a comparison so inflammatory that even his defenders went silent. He was discussing how American radio works, specifically how terrestrial radio stations broadcast songs millions of times while only songwriters and publishers receive payment. Performers and bands get nothing. He wanted to frame this as economic exploitation, a legitimate complaint about an unfair system. Instead, he said musicians were treated worse than slaves. The reaction was immediate and severe. Social media exploded. Critics called it grotesque. Commentators labeled it historically insulting and morally careless. Op-eds attacked him for using slavery, one of America's darkest chapters, as an intensifier for a financial complaint. He did not retreat from the argument about radio royalties. He kept defending the core point. Later, as backlash intensified, he acknowledged he could have chosen better language. But the damage was already done. What remained in people's minds was not a thoughtful critique of music industry economics. What remained was an image of a wealthy rock icon reaching for one of history's ugliest comparisons to make a business point land harder. His critics began articulating a sharper observation. The problem with John Simmons is not just what he believes. It is how casually he is willing to harm people while making his points. In December 2017, a female broadcaster filed suit in Los Angeles Superior Court against Gene Simmons. The alleged incident occurred at a Rock and Brews restaurant location he co-owned in San Bernardino County. She described going to the restaurant for an interview and encountering unwanted sexual behavior. The allegations were specific and disturbing. He placed her hand on his knee, flicked her throat forcefully, reached toward her rear end, and steered normal questions into sexual innuendo. Simmons denied the claims and said he would defend his reputation. But the lawsuit gave his critics something far more serious than another inflammatory quote. It fed a broader narrative that had been forming for years, that the aggressive character he would sold on stage could not always be separated from the man himself. And this was not the only story circulating. For years, accounts of boundary-crossing behavior had followed him. Each new allegation landed in an atmosphere already filled with suspicion. The public began to perceive his persona differently. The tongue-wagging demon that Kiss had created in 1973 slowly began to look, to his harshest critics, less like a theatrical achievement and more like a mask, a way to conduct behavior and then hide behind spectacle when questions arose, whether fair or unfair. This shift mattered profoundly. Once a celebrity's image hardens around conduct rather than accomplishment, the weight of everything changes. Every interview feels heavier. Every joke lands differently. Every headline carries new meaning. By 2024, John Simmons had stopped trying to moderate his image. In a podcast interview, he declared, "I am an asshole. So what?" He presented it almost as a mission statement. At 75, he explained, he had reclaimed the insult as part of his identity. He even pointed back to his 2004 solo album as proof that none of this was new, that he had made peace with being disliked long ago. In his telling, once you accept the label and wear it proudly, it loses its power. It becomes strength. He extended the same unflinching honesty to money. He admitted without hesitation that yes, he does things for money. Then he told people it was none of their business how much he earned or what he accepted. This kind of bluntness fascinates some people. Most wealthy entertainers chase profit while performing indifference to it. Simmons skips the pretense entirely, but there is something unsettling in how he says it. He can sound almost proud of stripping away every softness, as if raw self-interest deserves applause because it is delivered without disguise. The fan base split into two irreconcilable camps, and the divide only deepened. One side saw a ruthless operator obsessed with money, fame, and his own mythology. They pointed to his bragging about sleeping with thousands of women. They pointed to the lawsuits. They pointed to expensive meet and greet packages, premium memorabilia, the endless monetizing of nostalgia. They saw a man squeezing every last dollar from the empire he would help build, not just controversial, but a pure distillation of the worst aspects of rock stardom turned into a business. The other side saw a hard-nosed businessman who took a face-painted bar band and transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar operation. They heard him talk about piracy, about streaming, about lazy assumptions in the music industry, and they felt he was saying uncomfortable truths that others avoided. To them, Simmons was not warm, but he was honest. They did not need him to be likable. They wanted him to be sharp, effective, and unafraid. The tension never resolved. Social media would split the same way every time he said anything public. Some people declared he would finally gone too far. Others shrugged and said, "That is just Gene being Jean." A phrase that itself said something important. Outrage had become ritualized, and the man at the center of it knew exactly how to sustain it. By 2025, Gene Simmons was 76 years old, and the body that had powered decades of relentless touring was beginning to show the cost. What once looked like superhuman stamina was starting to resemble something more troubling, a gamble with mortality. In 2023, dehydration forced him to stop a show mid-performance. He received medical attention on stage, then insisted he was fine. He went backstage briefly, recovered somewhat, and returned to finish the concert. The decision fit his pattern perfectly. He pushes through. He keeps moving. He refuses the appearance of weakness, but the pattern that had defined him, the refusal to yield, the determination to move forward no matter what, began to look different when viewed through the lens of aging and accumulated health risk. Dehydration, heart strain, medication side effects, these are not inconveniences when you are in your 70s. They are warnings. The pandemic exposed the fragility beneath the spectacle. In 2021, the farewell tour, Kiss's final chapter, was disrupted by COVID-19. On August 25, 2021, his 72nd birthday, Simmons tested positive despite being fully vaccinated. The diagnosis forced postponements and quarantine at a moment when the tour had already been battered by months of delays caused by the pandemic. The episode revealed an uncomfortable reality. Touring for aging rock stars means constant exposure. Buses, planes, hotels, packed venues with crowds breathing the same recycled air. Every day carries risk. Every show is a potential vector for illness. Yet the Kiss machine barely paused. It adjusted, absorbed the disruption, and rolled forward. The tour kept going, demonstrating once again how powerful the brand had become. Even a global pandemic could not stop the machine entirely. But the ending became blurred. The band was promoted as saying goodbye. Fans were told this was the definitive farewell. Then delays stretched the calendar. More farewell legs were announced. Final shows kept getting postponed and rescheduled. When Kiss officially played their final New York show in 2023, even that did not feel like a true ending. Because by April 2026, John Simmons had announced new solo dates across California and Nevada, plus a 5-day resort residency in Cancun scheduled for October 2025-2026. At that point, retirement stopped looking like the end of a road. It started looking like a marketing slogan that had served its purpose. In early October 2025, an alarming moment shattered the narrative that everything was fine. John Simmons was driving his Lincoln Navigator on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu on a Tuesday afternoon when, according to reports, he suddenly lost consciousness. The SUV drifted across multiple lanes of traffic and crashed into a parked car. Emergency services arrived. Simmons was conscious but disoriented. He told responders he had either fainted or blacked out behind the wheel before the collision. He was transported to a nearby hospital, evaluated, and released. Officials reported no serious injuries, which was fortunate. An SUV crossing multiple lanes on one of California's most dangerous roads could have caused catastrophic harm. But the immediate aftermath revealed something troubling about how Simmons operates. He tried to control the narrative. On social media, he minimized the incident. He called it a slight fender bender. He told fans he was completely fine. The message might have worked if additional details had not emerged. Shannon Tweed, his wife, provided a very different version of events. She explained that Simmons had recently changed prescription medications. His doctors had warned him to drink significantly more water, something she said he actively dislikes doing. In her telling, the crash was not random. It was a predictable result. Dehydration combined with new medication created a dangerous situation. Suddenly, the story shifted. This was not a small traffic mishap. This was a preventable health failure involving a 76-year-old man who had already shown signs of dehydration problems in public just 2 years earlier. The questions became more pointed. Was he taking his age seriously? Was the schedule still being managed as if he were decades younger? Had his refusal to slow down crossed from admirable into reckless? His response only deepened the unease. He tried to diffuse the incident with humor, joking online that these things happen, especially to people like him who are terrible drivers. The line was intended to be self-mocking. Instead, for many people, it landed with dark irony. A man had lost consciousness on a busy highway, crossed multiple lanes of traffic, hit a parked vehicle, and then joked about being a bad driver as if that explained anything. Reports began circulating that linked the comment to a separate incident from Sunset Boulevard, which made the joke feel less like a throwaway comment and more like a troubling pattern. The image that lingered was impossible to shake. An aging rock icon brushing past a near catastrophe and then moving immediately toward the next obligation. A different legal cloud added another layer to the growing concern. A lawsuit tied to a July 2024 collision on Sunset Boulevard described a serious crash. The plaintiff, Evan Brenner, was involved with a Tesla in an incident involving a vehicle connected to the Simmons household. He claimed the impact caused severe injuries, shock to his nervous system, ongoing pain, and a need for future medical treatment. He also said the accident had damaged his ability to work and was seeking compensation that included lost income and medical costs. The language transformed the case from a routine traffic dispute into something much larger. This was a man claiming his life had been disrupted. But Shannon Tweed Simmons offered a starkly different account. She said Jean was not in the car at all. She described it as a very minor accident where nobody was injured beyond scratched paint. She recalled the Tesla driver as pleasant at the scene and friendly in subsequent text exchanges. The two versions felt incompatible. One described serious harm and life disruption. The other described a trivial fender bender being inflated into a legal claim. In a world where celebrity, legal strategy, and media attention intersect so easily, the gap between those narratives became its own kind of story. Observers could not determine which version was accurate. That uncertainty itself became part of the broader picture. A wealthy aging rock star with a pattern of traffic incidents, accounts that contradicted each other, and a wife offering explanations that sounded almost defensive. By the second half of 2025, the narrative that had built John Simmons into a rock legend was fracturing in real time. He was still performing. The tour announcements kept coming. The merchandise still sold. But the public conversation had shifted in a way that felt irreversible. The man who had once commanded stadiums and created an empire through spectacle and survival instinct was now a figure whose every action carried heavier scrutiny. The demon face that had terrified and fascinated audiences for 5 decades seemed, to many observers, less like theatrical genius and more like armor, a way to conduct yourself without accountability. The immigrant kid who had taught himself America through comic books and determination had become a billionaire businessman who spoke about his own interests with brutal frankness. That transformation from hungry survivor to wealthy provocateur contained its own kind of tragedy. Because somewhere along the journey from Queens to the top of rock and roll, the instinct that had propelled him forward started to twist in on itself. The refusal to show weakness became an inability to acknowledge limitation. The relentless drive to monetize became the only language he could speak. The character that had been built to command attention started to look, increasingly, like the only thing left of him. And as he entered his 8th decade, with health scares multiplying and the world around him changing faster than he could control, that shift became impossible to ignore. John Simmons built his entire life on saying things other people would not say. He made himself unforgettable. He created an empire. He left an indelible mark on rock and roll. But he did it all in a way that left very little room for redemption, forgiveness, or grace. And as 2025 progressed, the question was no longer whether he would fall. It was how far he would fall before he stopped moving.